So, Tom McMorrow, McMo, welcome to what is now the 8th episode of In Conversation with myself.
Thank you, Dan.
Thanks for taking time out this evening to join me on a podcast.
Uh-huh.
Just noticing your T-shirt there. For those that cannot see, Tom is sporting a limited edition Lost in T-shirt. The Lost in T-shirt that was to glow, sort of reflect in the dark, but probably missed by everybody and the printers who got it slightly wrong.
Oh, this has definitely never glowed in the dark for me. They've definitely missed that one. I don't know what happened there.
So how you doing, Tom?
I'm not too bad at all. Yeah, I'm not too bad. It's it's been a bit of a rainy day here in London. But yeah, I'm good.
Yeah, we had some freakish wind last night. I don't mean me and Emma. I mean weather, and that certainly blew the trees and everything else about. So I was out last night at 10 o'clock securing the garden furniture and all these kind of like middle class things that go on in your garden that you've got to protect, so you're not out
Tied
the
down.
weekend. Yeah, the weekend following, buying it all again because it's flown across 5 gardens. Yeah. So Tom, I know you very well. You
Mm-hmm.
have been a friend of mine now for, I think it's going back like even 4 years.
Mm-hmm.
For the benefit of our listeners, just we'd love to find out a little bit more about yourself tonight.
Mm-hmm.
Start us off like I do with many. Tell us about your kind of background, where you kind of first discovered your love of the underground music scene.
Well, yeah, I mean, I guess I'll tell you a little bit about my relationship with music generally, because I think that'll lead into where, how I kind of got into being into the progressive scene itself and into house music itself. Um, I mean, 'cause I've always come from my family's very musical, um, and I used to play the flute and the piano when I was 11. Around about 14, I started playing the guitar. So music's always been a kind of a part of my life, very important part of my life, really. I've always loved it, and in a very very particular way. Um, but my tastes were from a young age quite eclectic. I was always into a bit of everything, really. Love classical music. Um, Beethoven, for example, was my favorite composer. Bit of a nutter himself. Um, it would have been like an early underground DJ, I reckon, back in his day. Um,
More of a Sasha than a digweed.
yeah, well, yeah, most certainly, yeah. What always amazed me about him is he was deaf when he wrote the Fifth Symphony, which just always used to blow my mind. How somebody would have that amount of music just in there, in some way that he'd be able to then still get out into the world. And I loved a bit of pop. I was into Madonna. I loved a bit of Belinda Carlisle, Jackson 5. I loved rock. And I even loved a bit of electronic stuff with, Jean-Michel Jarre. I mean, Jean-Michel Jarre I loved. And I think it can be probably easily said that, he was somewhat of an influence on my sort of developing interest in electronic music. Um, and so, I grew up, I reckon, I grew up in I was born 73, so mid 80s. I mean, I was 11 in 1984, and that sort of late 70s to 80s scene was so rich musically. It really was. And there was just so much there. Um, and then in the 90s was the grunge scene, UK indie stuff. Um, Stone Roses was one of the biggest influences on me. I mean, that album just blew my mind. And I had a friend who would listen to it. He was slightly older than me, and he was, he would buy all sorts of music and introduce me to all sorts of music. And so I had a really I was really lucky to have this mate who introduced me to this stuff, and it was just like, wow, okay, this is awesome. um I became a bit of a goth at one point as well. So whereas there was the sort of lighter side to some of my musical tastes, there was also that kind of darker, deeper side. I used to listen to bands like um Fields of the Nephilim, Sisters of Mercy, The Mission, um that kind of the dark side of that the musical world, really. um and then for me, sort of that sort of early house, acid house scene, the kind of that summer of love, 89 to 90, it kind of passed me by, really. Even though around that time I was about 18, and but I was quite religious, and that scene was, wild illegal parties, association with drugs, and so the individual I was, it wasn't something that particularly appealed to me. Um, but I had a cousin who was a DJ, um, who was my age, and he put together a couple of CDs for me, which I listened to, and it was something he just made for me, and it was really my first education in house music. I remember falling in love with that track by Crystal Waters, Gypsy Woman. That, to me, still to this day, I absolutely love that track. And that would have been, you know, one of the first time when I was like, oh, you know what? I really like this music. Um,
So
and
just
to this day, he's still a DJ. He himself, he DJs, he
just
does
to
a lot of old school stuff. Sorry,
just
Dave.
to sorry, yeah, just to interject there. I'm sorry for cutting you off,
No,
but
no.
it made me think of something there.
Yeah,
The It's an interesting combination that me knowing you but not knowing parts about your history like this
yeah,
is that when you were saying you were drawn to darker music,
yeah,
yet you were quite religious,
yeah,
and yet there was something about the rave scene that
yeah,
was kind of taboo.
yeah,
That's an interesting dichotomy because
yeah,
at you're only a little bit older than me. You're 5 years older than me, but
yeah,
with you being at that key age, very much what your parents thought about you or society thought about the music you like almost branded you. And there's a couple of things you said there. I mean, one was the sort of references to the drug scene.
yeah,
That mix that I did for our Progressive House UK birthday,
yeah,
I used Hardcore Uproar and I used the sample that was on YouTube where
yeah,
they'd taken all of the news kind of articles that were on at the time, news interviews with people on the street,
yeah,
explaining exactly what you've just said about, oh, they must all be on drugs, and they reference, oh, is it like a cult, is it a kind of cult thing?
yeah,
Yet interestingly, the music you were listening to in the rock end,
yeah,
it was more accepted
yeah,
that
yeah,
that could be like that.
yeah, yeah,
And it's interesting that a mere culturally made up reference to this music being dangerous, which was peddled heavily by the government at the time, was enough to put you off a little
yeah,
bit.
yeah,
That's
yeah,
Yeah, I just wanted to pick that up
yeah.
because that's
Anyway,
fascinating because we're clearly drawn to something a bit darker.
yeah, because in religious circles as well, the way it was spoken about. It was exactly what you're saying. It was very much, more the devil's music, and sort of somewhat demonic than, say, listening to the Mission, which almost had these religious overtones. I mean, the Mission goes without saying, Sisters of Mercy, even though the music was, you know irreligious in so many ways, and could be seen as even, just as demonic. It was more accepted. It was more acceptable, for sure. But in some sense, it satisfied some of those kind of needs to, as a teenager, to be somewhat rebellious, you know and to be, to express some of your more rebellious nature. And my parents would never have liked me going to gigs like Fields of the Nephilim, but if I'd said I was going to a rave, it would have been an absolute no. It wasn't going to happen. Do you know what I mean? So yeah, it's interesting how the scene itself was characterized, certainly by the media and by the conservative press. Yeah.
I mean, I'm guessing. I think I'm right. You grew up in Ireland, right?
No. I grew up in
No, you've
London.
got Irish parents. Is that it?
That's right. So my dad's Irish and my mum's Italian, um, both Catholic. So I grew up in a staunch Catholic environment, which was uh, very conservative, and even musically, um, the certain things that you might listen to. So even certain elements of rock. So certain elements of metal. So you know certain types of rock bands would be frowned upon simply because of their uh, you know the degree to which they were expressed you know outrageous lyrics to do with sexuality, or to
Yeah.
do with you know um, heaven and hell. I mean, ACDC's Highway to Hell, is the sort of thing that it would have been an absolute shocker to my parents. Why would anyone sing about that? Almost kind of reveling in the kind of that element of life. And so unfortunately that had some influence on the sorts of music that I would listen to. But I began to study religion and began to sort of like change my relationship with religion, which at the same time also then gave me an opportunity to be a bit more open to aspects of life, which, up until that point, it would have been, I would have been closed down to. And so I started to listen um, to more house music, around sort of, the early 90s, between 90 and 92. Um, it's when I sort of started clubbing in the sixth form. And, I had this mate, Boris, convinced me to go to my first first club, which was Ministry of Sound. And this is in its earliest days. I think it'd only been open like a year. And a load of us in the sixth form, would go down to this event in Shoreditch at the Shoreditch Town Hall. It was called the Whirly Gig. And they had a DJ there called DJ Monkey Pilot. And he'd play a whole bunch of different stuff like trance, house, acid house, trip hop, disco. And the night would always end with everyone would gather around with this giant sort of like tarpaulin that would fill the entire hall, and balloons would come down, and everyone would get underneath it. And it was amazing to me. And there would be balloons everywhere and everyone getting underneath the tarpaulin. And it was, it was really, my introduction to this kind of music and this kind of scene. And I loved it. I absolutely loved it.
Do you think
And
that? Do you think
that's still going, by the way. The Whirling is still going.
No
They
way.
still have it's still going. They're still having events to this day.
Is it still
Yeah.
the same piece of tarpaulin though? That's what I want to know.
That's
You
a
know what I
good
mean?
question.
That's just supposed to last forever, isn't it? Let's
Yeah. I don't know where they got it from, and what it was just huge, and it would get rolled out end of the night, final track, and then these balloons would come down. Everyone would pull it and fire the balloons up into the air, and apparently it still goes on. It still goes on.
I think this is just a guess on my behalf, maybe, but I think what essentially is very different about people's first experiencing of going clubbing, or certainly the house music scene, is that first of all, the music was very new. People didn't know particularly how to behave to it, how to particularly dance to it. I mean, we all see footage of raves, the kind of very sort of primitive, sort of stomping, dancing, nothing like today's standards of what you would describe as dance. But I think people were always used to queuing up in traditional senses at gigs, concerts, looking the same way, looking in the same direction, looking towards the stage. In the theatre, you would look towards the stage. You were used to this kind of proscenium arch type thing. And what I certainly found in my early days of clubbing was that this freedom of expression, this kind of looking at each other almost as the music was playing, working it out together. And often venues would create these little you know, to use this sort of religious term, but not in a religious way, would create these little rituals that would
Yeah.
bring people together and say,
Yeah.
oh, we went to this place and they did this thing.
Yeah.
You know, those sorts of little extras, you could only afford to do that if you were a band with serious clout that could
Yeah.
that could have a tour that could have something that everybody did,
Yeah.
either by way of sing along
Yeah.
or pass maybe a flag along,
Yeah.
or something like that. And I
Yeah.
think that these are the things that when I discussed it with other people, you kind of go away and you're like, what was that? What was
Yeah.
going on?
Yeah.
Like, was that real?
Yeah.
We all just did it. I
Yeah.
think that's a nice story,
Yeah.
um, because it's very easy, I think, for people around that time who also clubbed
Mm.
to imagine the kind of thing you were experiencing there.
Mm. And because there was also this element that, you know, for those who've grown up in a religious environment and you know regularly gone to mass, and a mass is, you've got a group of people, a congregation, you've got a central point at the front, you've got a priest, you know, who's up there doing his thing, connecting with God up at the altar. And you know, you go to an event at a club, and it wasn't entirely a different environment. In fact, it was very similar, but just so much more fun. You had a guy up at the front communing through with God, but through, you know, through the decks, you know, through the music, and you know, a whole congregation of people in front, basically praising, praising him, hands in the air, you know, enjoying themselves and dancing in a way that was quite tribal, that had this kind of, you know, lots of religious overtones in that sense. And it's, and you can't escape that, you know. And you think it, you know, it reminds me of that scene in the Matrix, is it the second one, so Matrix Revolutions, where there's that everyone dancing, that tribal, to dance and to be in an environment where people are dancing to a rhythm is is, you know, it's written in our bones. You know, it's kind of, it's what it's so human, and it's a
Yeah,
very
it's
very
yeah,
human thing,
primitive.
you know. And it's, and it was almost missing from that religious environment, unless of course you went to some of these evangelical events where everyone is kind of, you know, um hands in the air, you know, uh going a bit mental, you know, for Jesus, you know. And I'd been to events like that, and so, you know, suddenly here was something quite similar, but with this music that had this energy and that would make you feel a certain way. That was, it was very difficult not to like, you know.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I never thought we'd probably dwell on this part of the topic, but certainly, you mentioned Ministry of Sound there. When I
Well,
first
ministry, I
started,
think about that word ministry, you know,
yeah,
ministry, you know,
yeah,
it's a
the
religious word,
Ministry
yeah.
of
The
Sound,
ministry of sound, yeah.
and they became very famous for a certain period with nights like Ruling
Hmm.
that were CJ McIntosh, who played gospel house.
Yeah.
A huge portion of
Yeah.
music around that time, the
That's right.
early sort of stuff from America, the gospel stuff, you know, was heavily centered around singing about God.
Yeah.
It was.
Yeah.
You could easily think that they were talking about love. They were really talking about their love for Jesus, God,
Yeah.
and gospel music was a really happy, joyful
Oh
music.
yeah.
It was a huge part of it.
Yeah.
I would probably argue it was bigger in London, than it was up north. I think you got a
Yeah.
lot more dubby sort of stuff, and of course we did have the Stone Roses and various other sort of Manchester and more of an acid house sound because of the
Hmm.
hacienda.
Yeah.
But certainly the things you've discussed there make perfect sense to me. I
Yeah.
think, there was also a kind of, um, a you know, you would get your groups of friends and you would do a pilgrimage to other clubs around the country. You
Yeah.
would head for this special thing
Yeah.
in droves of cars, you know,
Yeah.
hoping you would get in, hoping you would experience this potential magic that
Yeah.
happened in other towns that you'd heard about.
Yeah.
Um, I didn't really think when we first started having these conversations and doing these podcasts that this part of the kind of chat would be as interesting every time for me.
Mm.
I thought what would happen is when we would discuss this, people would sort of say the same things over and
Mm.
over. But what I've been amazed about is the difference
Mm.
of people's experiences of almost the same time period.
Yeah.
dependent on where they actually lived.
Yeah.
Now, you and I are north and south.
Mhm.
I'm originally northwest. I'm not as north as I am now.
Mhm.
And our experiences, just by definition, were totally different. So what, in those early days, where were the kind of clubs that you frequented? Where did you hone in on that was your kind of, rites to passage, and you learnt your kind of like tastes from club
Yeah,
wise?
so I've already mentioned the Whirly gig, but again, the sounds there were so eclectic. But I pretty soon after that, we would start to frequent a club in the Embankment called Megatripolis, where they played mainly trance and acid trance, and that became a bit of a regular. And I loved that sort of hard sound. Um, and we would go, and then basically, um, I had a mate who decided to live in a squat. He left home, decided to live in a squat, and when I'd go and visit him, he'd have me listening to techno, and I'd never really, he kind of schooled me in techno, and I began to really like that kind of really minimalist hard sound. And we'd go to events like Megadog, where they had bands like setups like Eat Static, Trans Global Underground, um, System 7. I started listening to all that sort of music, 808 State. Um, and while at the same time, there'd be the odd night I'd still go to an indie night at like Woody's in Ladbroke Grove, where it would be all indie stuff. And so, I still had this real eclectic taste. I could listen and I could enjoy both, and I loved both. And I always used to look at the DJs in both these sorts of environments, um, and want to be able to do that. And I thought I'd love to be able to do that, but I never really had the confidence in myself. I never actually thought that I would be that sort of person who could do something like that. Um, but then in around 95, I went to Manchester University, and things took on sort of another it's a sort of another step in my evolution, to where I am today. And because at that time the hacienda was still open, and that was a regular. So we, in the 3 years I was in Manchester, we were going to hacienda. And in those early days at 95, Jeremy Healy was a big fave.
Tom, how long have we known each other? We were in Manchester at the same time.
No way, seriously.
So my brother first took me to Hacienda in
Yeah.
'94.
Hmm.
In 1995, I was 17, regularly going over to his club
Wow.
in there.
Yeah.
Friends that would drive us over.
Well, there
I
you go.
moved there in '96,
Yeah.
and I left just before 1998.
Well, there you go. So
So
we've
we would have
probably
gone,
crossed
yeah.
paths. No two ways about it.
So
Yeah.
you would have done Cream tours.
Yeah.
Jeremy Healy and Graham Park would
Yeah.
come together on the Cream tours.
Yeah.
You would,
Cream.
did you?
Some of this. There was some of the earliest mixes that I bought with some of those cream mixes. Yeah.
And what about oh, this is good. This is going to be really interesting. I'm going to try not to sort of steal half the show talking about Manchester. But did you ever go to Sacha and Digweed's Northern Exposure tour at the house?
So I didn't actually go to the tour, but but at the time, because it was 96, wasn't it, that album
Yeah.
came out? And absolutely fell in love with it. For one reason or another, I never actually managed to go and see them. Yeah, so it was, to this day, something I regret. But yeah, no, yeah, I was aware of them. Yeah, they were so huge. Yeah,
Because there
but we,
wasn't. Did you ever go to like? I mean, I was pretty much determined on where my brother were fancied going, or where we'd all organised. Because there was bowlers in life. That was quite a different type of house
hmm
music. That
hmm
was a little bit more, dare I say, on the kind of the older school happy piano vibe, whereas the
hmm
Haas kind of did have these tour DJs. Saturday night was very regular with like Hacienda night with Graham sort of Park and those types of DJs. David Dunn, I think, was resident then as well. And it was the tour nights that were more interesting, actually, as there has been a club rather than the night that they played at. Where else did you manage to frequent? Because there was
a little place called Sankey Soap.
Golden.
That was a regular. And you know, being a student, we would have loads of our own little parties, and we had loads of our own little DJs who just, you know, they would turn up, they'd rock up and just blow the place up. And they were playing stuff like psytrance, techno, you know, prog, and that was, and I remember at the time, and what always used to blow me away is how different one DJ could be to another, and how particular DJs, so DJs who played prog and psytrance, just would absolutely, for me, you know, you get those goosebumps. You just thought, oh yes, it would just be amazing, absolutely amazing stuff. Yeah, so you know, Manchester was a big evolution in my love for that music and for house music and electronic music generally. But still, I you know, it, you know, as in terms of DJing, I never, you know, although I'd started putting my hand in and, you know, having a little go and spinning a few records here and there, I still didn't quite have the confidence in myself. And it was only till I started teaching. So I graduated in 98 and I was teaching by 99. And and interestingly, this is another sort of little growth element. On my way to work and on my way back to work, I couldn't stand your standard Radio 1 Capital Radio. I just couldn't stand.
Me neither. I hated it.
It was, and so what I ended up doing, and I had a little Fiat Panda, you know, and I, you know, with a cassette deck and a radio, and I'd tune it, and I'd find it, you know, I'd find pirate radio stations playing house music, and one of them was Point Blank Radio. And I tune into Point Blank and another one that I can't remember the name of. And they'd be playing US Garage, Deep House. I mean, at that time, UK Garage was a big thing, but I was never a big fan of UK Garage. That US vocal, funky house. And I was just like, what? Where has this been in my life? Because really, to a large extent, although, you know, there've been you know, elements, you know, I got introduced to elements of it. Largely, my life had been quite the harder edge, that kind of that prog sound, techno, psytrance, a lot of trance. In fact, I love trance. But suddenly, I was listening to this funky house, US house, vocal house, and like you say, so many of these producers are actually working within gospel communities and making religious music, but really funky and really just beautiful house. And I was there, I'd be kind of recording shows, writing down the names of things, going, what is that? Where can I listen to this again? Got really excited by that pirate radio, you know, house scene.
I think for
just
me,
such an extent that I would get in the car at the end of work and whack a cassette in that I'd recorded, or turn the radio on, whack it up on my little 5-inch wide speakers of my Fiat Panda, you know, and you know, rock on home, and the kids would be like, "Yes, sir, listen to his house, listen to Mr. McMo." You know what I mean? I'd be like, "Oh yeah, see you later, guys." You know, and yeah, it was funny, but yeah, because I was 26, 27 at the time, you know, and yeah, that was a life changer for me, you know.
It's weird, isn't it? Like, like I said, there's 5 years difference between us, but it's quite significant. You're younger than my brother. He's 8 years older than me, and his influence on me, which I've talked about before, being able to take me places and get me in, was because he was 8 years older.
Yeah,
He knew where he could get me in. And also, by very definition of me being that much younger, sort of 15,
Yeah.
I had to go where he was going, right? I
Yeah.
wasn't going to go out in Manchester and say, see you later. I was dependent on him. So his tastes were my tastes. And interesting you say that, because when I think about the level of which I was into that music, by the time I was in Manchester, it wasn't, for me, it wasn't just, oh, I like this.
Yeah.
I had a very deep understanding of exactly what I liked.
Oh,
I
interesting.
knew that
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
liked certain DJs because they did certain things.
Yeah.
Similar to you, though, I was quite happy to go from one style to another
Mm-hmm.
because I appreciated its difference. I think
Yeah.
one of the things that I really understood about Gospel House is that the people who sang it sang with such joy and
Yeah.
passion and
Yeah.
heart,
Yeah.
probably because they were singers that were taken from very early on, singing in choirs, singing in gospel choirs, became singers, natural singers, and sang with such ease that it sounded better than any pop record you could ever hear,
Yeah.
because the voices are so rich.
Yeah.
And that was something that pretty much lasted, and probably until about 1999, when that music kind of left favor and we moved into this more middle ground, where music generally started to speed up,
Mm-hmm.
where if it was house, you termed it right, it became funky house, which just
Yeah.
kind of meant faster house music,
Mm-hmm.
less lyrics, less songs,
Mm-hmm.
less actual like content,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
and became this more slightly throwaway culture. But
Mm-hmm.
my time in Manchester cemented a lot of that, because Piccadilly Records and all of the places where I went and bought records when I was in Manchester
Yeah.
obviously peddled a lot of this stuff.
Yeah.
You might buy an album um, of kind of like Underworld. You might buy that on a 12-inch album and
Mm-hmm.
have it in your collection. You
Mm-hmm.
didn't you didn't necessarily mix it. I was
Yeah.
very much getting used to mixing the dubs. AMPM records were massive for me,
Yeah.
and I sort of cut my teeth playing that in Manchester. Um, but I'd come from the hardcore, the rave,
Yeah.
and the energy of all those types of music was what just resonated with me over any other kind of music.
Yeah.
Um, I remember, you know, I remember the Stone Roses. I remember it. I remember paisley shirts, early 90s, school discos. Stone Roses would come on, and then you'd have like Snap,
Yeah.
and you'd have these real hodgepodge of pop tunes, because they were all pop tunes.
Yeah.
And as soon as I'd found this other outlet, that was it. It was like
That was it.
Narnia. I was
Yeah.
just through the door,
Yeah.
never came back. But of course, like I'm saying, it's because of the age you were at. You were already going out. You're making choices freely about where you can go out,
Yeah.
where you access it. I think I was, again, I've mentioned it before, kind of waiting for tapes to come to me,
Mm.
sending off for tapes of these places that I was not yet old enough to get in.
Mm-hmm.
And I was imagining what these things would be like.
It
As soon
sounded
as
like
I
you
was
found your groove quite early on in that sense.
Yeah,
You
yeah,
know.
I probably did. I think by the time I
Yeah.
went to uni in Salford, I was a lot more kind of quote unquote advanced
Yeah.
socially,
Yeah.
understanding what the queue was like, not
Yeah.
shitting your pants that you weren't going to get in, acting
Mm-hmm.
a certain way because you just acted with confidence. Once you got in a club, you weren't sort of going, what the hell? Like a lot of people who were
Yeah.
freshly 18, freshly from little towns or little villages that had come to uni were kind of like, what is this? I
Yeah.
was in Manchester for the music, is why I went. The
Yeah.
degree was certainly second.
Yeah.
Um, but I guess this is where I want to lead on with you, Tom, is that, I was starting to DJ then. I was starting to DJ
Yeah.
in my friends' bedrooms, and
Yeah.
I'd gone from, this isn't just something I like and I listen to all the time.
Yeah.
I buy tapes, I
Yeah.
swap tapes.
Yeah.
I was buying and mixing the records.
Yeah.
When did you start thinking, right,
Well, it was around this time now. So I, because I'd started teaching and I was getting money in, I, so a couple of things happened. So one, I had a mate who I was at school with, and sixth form, Carl, who had bought some 1210s, and he bought all the gear, and he had a great taste in music, and he sort of began to school me in sort of some of the, he had loads of great deep house records, and he'd let me have a go, and he was like, "Oh yeah, no, you're all right, mate. You know, you know what you're doing, and you should give it a go." And at the same time, I went out with a girl who was she also had all the gear. She had these 1200s, this lovely silver 1200s. And she was a drum and bass DJ, and I used to watch her playing, and then when we back at hers, I'd give it a go, and again she'd be like, "You should do it because you tend to sync quite easily. You're not you've got a good ear for the beats." And I'd often be able to sync something that she was having difficulty with, and she was like, "Why aren't you doing this?" And I'm like, I don't know. I didn't really I never really had the confidence in myself to think this is something I could do. But I decided to take the plunge, and I had a bit of money from teaching, and for about 1,200 quid, I got some secondhand 1210s and a mixer and speakers and amp, and I had all the gear, and I started to give it a go, and that's when. So this would have been sort of, well, around the early 2000s, so about 2000, 2001, and and began loving it and began buying records, and I was listening to pirate radio stations, and the records that would be in, the DJ told you what it was. I'd write it down, and at that time you didn't have Shazam, you didn't have much internet, but you could order. I would find this. I can't remember what I'd use. I think, is it Track Source or something, where you could actually just type in the name of the record, and then they would send you, and often there would be US imports, and you'd be spending through the teeth for them. And I was buying a lot of US garage, a lot of this vocal stuff, and a lot of deep stuff, deep house. And then I'd be going to places in central London like Reckless Records, Bluebird Records, Edgware Road, Groove Records on Greek Street, um, Rough Trade, Portobello Road. In fact, Rough Trade was my first record bag was a Rough Trade record bag, and really was playing a lot at home, practicing a lot at home, and then it was just I was just playing out at birthdays, school parties, weddings, and that was it. I never managed to progress into. I think I played in a club on Upper Street twice. Um, I can't even remember what it was, or why I did, but that's as far as I got. Other than that, I was just playing within a kind of community and group of friends, and for myself. Um, and and I loved it, and I continued to do that for a while, um, until really the job began to take over, because teaching began to become all consuming, really. Um, and eventually the DJing became, put to the side somewhat, sadly. um and music, it's interesting how in certain respects the job was taking over my life, and in certain ways that I was losing some of that joy for music, into even just playing music. um but I was always still involved. I would sort of go to a lot of live events. My mate Jason, who had been a big influence on me throughout my life in terms of music, he'd always get me out. He'd get me a ticket for this and that, and we'd always be going out to events. So music was always still there in my life in some way, but teaching really, it started to sort of take over. And without going into too much detail, it broke me somewhat. But when it did, there it was a good thing, because what happened was I sort of went back to the music, and I rediscovered it in a way that just reignite the joy that it brought me in those early days, in the early 2000s. um
Did you
and
find did you find that
you know,
you
and I've
kind of
not
had
looked back, you know. So yeah, it was but that was, you know, I don't have a huge history of like DJing in clubs, you know, like a lot of people do. It was such a personal thing, and whenever I played out to, you know, at parties, and people would say, you should be playing out more often, you should be playing here, you should be playing there. um but it was just not something I ever quite got into, you know. um Sadly, you know. um
so a couple of things to pick up on there, Tom.
yeah,
One of the things that I found is probably true to a lot of the people I speak to is that during that period of kind of, I think it's around sort of 25 to 30,
yeah,
there's an element, you know, I'm not going to say this is just a male thing. It could be different for different reasons for females than it is males, but I think there's an element where you think you have to grow up, and where your money and time is being spent is suddenly either by way of relationship or by
yeah,
way of career,
yeah,
put in a position where you have to kind of choose one or the other, and one can't keep on existing.
that's right.
Music's a very enjoyable pastime, and it's an amazing hobby, but collecting records and being into it is also quite all encompassing. It's expensive, and it's very it's almost quite a personal thing. You know, no girlfriend of mine or friends of mine that would ever come record shopping.
Mm,
I used to go record shopping for hours and hours a week.
mm,
Hours. I'd go into uni, I'd come out of my lectures,
yeah.
I'd go along and I'd say to people, just going to pop into Manchester, and I'd be gone for 3 hours, digging through
Yeah,
piles and piles and piles of records to come home with two,
yeah,
having spent 20 quid. Now,
yeah,
I guess the difference for me going forward from that point is that when I then went back to Cheltenham, and when that's when my DJing really sort of started, I saw it as an opportunity to make money from doing it. You know,
yeah,
I'd practiced to a level of competency that I'd done all the private parties, done all the stuff, thought I'm good enough, done a few gigs, done a few things, and also was quite good at being social. So I'd engineered a little couple of places that would pay me, and as that went on, that would
nice.
afford me
Yeah,
probably about 100 to 120 quid a week,
nice. Yeah,
on top of getting a job in a
yeah,
coffee shop and in whatever else I could do, a clothes shop, all these different things. So I was always keen to be earning money and saw it as a skill that would enable my nightlife and my personal life to entwine.
yeah,
I'd been in bars. It all fit for me. My lifestyle became quite centered around that.
yeah,
And the reason I'm explaining this is because it was probably became quite a large part of my identity.
yeah,
However, similar to you, what happened is I I came out of being an assistant manager at a bar. I took a step down and I went to a smaller bar, and I'm an assistant manager there. I'd been there about a year and a half, and I just wanted something else from the world. And I decided to start my own business, which at the time was with a few people, and it was a little bit like what later became um, these sort of discount things where you could get huge discounts on stuff.
mm-hmm,
It was like a hard copy version of that.
mm-hmm,
And when I decided to do that, it was just I had to put all my efforts on it. We built a website, we got funding for this website, we got a Princess Trust loan,
yeah,
and the DJing just literally it just went out the window, and it was something I did like with mates on a Friday, or all sort of weekend parties, after clubbing.
yeah,
And I literally said to myself, well, I've got to grow up. Like this has got to take a back shelf. I just can't do it. I had been buying digital stuff,
yeah,
so started to like collate music a lot more thoroughly onto a digital format. And I never stopped DJing in terms of making music, because I
yeah,
always made sure that every month I did a mix. I've got mixes going back to like 2002. It's ridiculous.
yeah,
So I never ever stopped the link of wanting to create a mix. And the reason that I did is because I could very rarely find and we're not talking about like Global Underground CDs occupied a massive itch for so many people, but
Yeah.
I could never really not create a mix myself that I was happier with than listening to somebody else's.
Yeah.
It would have to be like a Digweed or somebody high in caliber
Mm-hmm.
that would ignite my imagination enough that
Yeah.
would drive me on to want to make my own mix.
Oh yeah.
But also I would go back to them as a reference point. But everybody else, when the explosion of like DJ and everybody started DJing,
Yeah.
I was just like, oh God, you know, Head Candy, all this like different like mini genres were coming out. I hated trance. I hated two-step garage. And I stuck to my guns in sort
Yeah.
of 99 to 2002, playing like
Yeah.
Chunky House,
Yeah.
playing elements of more popular stuff at the venues that I had to play that.
Yeah.
But I would really take people on what you probably know me as today, a
Yeah.
real journey through the night of different eclectic
Yeah.
music. But that
Fair play.
period, like I say, of just going, hang on, I just need to grow up. That is something that people either have kids, their job becomes front and center.
Mm.
And
But fair play to you for
yeah,
the, that you at least had the wherewithal and somewhat of that confidence to actually to get yourself out there and put yourself out there, and even in settings where you were getting paid for it. Because I don't know whether it was something about living in London, whether there was just a plethora of DJs, or whether and what it was just my own insecurities in regards to how it might be received, how confident I was in my own DJing skills. And as much as people would say, yeah, no, you're really good, why don't you play it? It it seemed to be quite a big, step to kind of go from what I was doing, which was just playing in parties and house parties and various events that were connected with friends and family, to playing in an environment where nobody knows you, and you're expected to make everyone dance. It was to me that was very, I was, it would have terrified me. So if it's fair play to anyone who actually manages to actually get into that kind of position, because it does take a certain, I think, um self-confidence, at the very least, just kind of that ability to say, you know what, I'm going to play this and you're going to like it or not, and whereas I was always terrified that what I might play might kill the dance floor, or just not be received well. And of course this is um yeah, do you know what I mean? So
yeah,
it's
yeah.
but I also know what you're saying in terms of like how but it then became a case of where suddenly everyone was DJing. And whereas maybe it was different in the environment where you were, but it lost also some of its kind of appeal, simply because you weren't doing something very different to what anyone else was doing, and that there was suddenly a you know you were one amongst hundreds of guys who were just doing the same, and so in some cases doing it better, you know so but yeah, no, I know what you say, that, and I know what
See,
you're saying, that it kind of there were changes in your life and in my life that just meant that to an extent you just slowly began to leave it alone, to the point where you just weren't doing it at all. You know.
I think looking back, you had to be, compared to today's environment, I think even back then you had to have a mix of skills. I think I had always
Yeah.
had good social skills. I always was quite good at hustling a little bit. I could understand from a business sense why
Yeah.
me going and pitching a venue
Yeah.
to DJ in
Yeah.
would be a good idea for them and me,
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
I
There you go.
knew the
There
social
you go.
circles,
There
yeah,
you go.
of how to
Yeah.
get people there.
And I think that probably comes from learning from quite a young age. And I think it's often the case of second borns and third borns, that there's a certain confidence within you, just from what you learn from your older brothers and sisters, or what your older brothers and sisters bring you into environments where you very quickly learn to just feel comfortable, and you learn those social skills. Whereas I'm a firstborn, and for me it was all, I I didn't have anyone to learn from, and my own inner self confidence wasn't great. It was quite difficult for me to do stuff like that. You know.
So let's say, like many, you
Hmm.
had a break, right?
Yeah.
You had a
I
Rossing
still
range,
put my
or
hand in, I still put my hand in, especially when I moved out the house. I had my own little room, and I would I moved in with 5 people, and I got a few complaints. I would rock the house with, with my music. But
how many
yeah,
records did you have?
so somewhere in the region of about 300. Not a huge amount. I mean, I know people, um, but yeah, it was. I had a small little record collection. Yeah, I'd got something. Yeah,
It was difficult having a record collection for a few reasons, because one is that there's an obvious um, monetary value to them. Your tastes change quite a lot when you collect records, so
yeah,
you find that some sort of disappear into the ether.
yeah,
What I found, I had a particularly difficult period of my life and had to kind of cart these records around with me. Once I'd got to kind of like maybe about 500 records,
yeah,
it was a serious undertaking to work out like living arrangements. Like when
yeah,
I went to uni as a student,
yeah,
these records were coming with
yeah,
me because I'd
yeah,
spent like hundreds and hundreds of pounds.
yeah,
They were literally more important than clothes, I think, at the time.
yeah,
And I remember piling them into whatever little tiny bedrooms I had. But then subsequently, living with friends like you, I lived with friends till I was about 25, kind of moved in with a girlfriend the first time I ever lived with somebody. I was sort of 26.
hmm,
You know, along come the records. The person I was with at the time wasn't into that world, was like, oh, are they coming? And you're like, yeah. And then you're shitting your pants because they haven't seen the boxes of CDs you've got. So you
exactly,
kind
yeah,
of like cart this stuff around, and I think this is what I
yeah,
mean about this kind of like looking through one eye at it from people going, "You
yeah,
still doing this? You still messing around at this?"
and because they
And like
weigh a
you say,
ton. A box of records is an absolute. It, it's like
gold.
50, 60 kilograms.
Yeah,
And
it's
so,
it's
yeah, even
serious.
even just carting them about is an absolute pain. Yeah,
Yeah, it's serious. So I think for me personally, the same sort of story really, where there was this hiatus. Um, so what? Say there's this gap.
yeah,
Like you said, you kept your
yeah,
hand kind of in it, like I did.
yeah,
I'd kind of make digital mixes.
yeah,
What was the what was the new eureka moment? What
yeah.
made you
Well, it
go?
was so I was aware as so I was still vinyl mixing um right up until um when was it now? So it would have been about 5, 6 years ago. And by that time, there had been quite a digital revolution. A lot of people were using CDJs and controllers, and to me, it seemed like an almost insurmountable electronic world that was beyond me. And I just thought, I'd look at a controller and just go, oh God, what is, what's going on there? And like, or see someone have a laptop and just be like, oh man. And because I didn't have a laptop for ages, and I was a bit of a luddite in that sense. But what happened about 5, 6 years ago is that I was, you know, watching a lot of YouTube. How like YouTube became a big thing, and people just watching a lot of YouTube in it. And I started to listen to mixes on YouTube, and I used to come across, Sasha and Digweed and doing mixes on YouTube, and Miss Monique. Was a big influence. I love watching Miss Monique. She'd do these hour-long mixes, and these all these other big name DJs, and I would be listening and going, oh my God, like how good is that track? And just getting these goosebumps, and just getting my groove on, and just thinking, oh my God, like this is still fucking good music. Excuse my French, and just loving, and just going, wait a minute, stopping it, pausing it, you know Shazamming it, or kind of, because Shazam was around then, and or looking up on the track listing, and watching them and thinking, okay, that doesn't look too bad. You know what? I can do this. You know what? I'm gonna get myself a controller. And because I was enjoying the music so much, I just wanted to have it and to listen to it. And I thought, well, if I'm going to have it and I'm going to listen to it like individual tracks, why don't you just start mixing again? And so I did. I bought a laptop, and I got a little DDJ, just a little DDJ 400, nothing too fancy. Got record box on, and that was it. And just, I was flying. I just realized, oh, you know what, this is actually, it's so easy. And not only is it easy, I'm absolutely loving this music still. And just reignited my passion, and at the same time found my groove. And what I mean by that is, whereas my taste in electronic music was so varied, and still is, and I still love all forms of it, progressive house just would do things to me. I would just get these emotions and these feelings of awe at times, or joy, or just goosebumps, that while you can, you hear a really funky house track, it would get you groove and get you dancing. You'd hear a properly chunky prog track and just be like, wow, just wow, like quite emotionally, like, what? And just that feeling, I decided, well, if something's going to make you feel like that, why stop? Why stop feeling like that? And I'm talking about, being sober. This is not something where you're high and you're feeling like that. You're totally sober. You've woken up in the morning and you've just been out of bed, and you just turn something on and you're like, oh, how good is that? And so on the back of that, like, I decided to sort of, you know what, I'm going to get involved. I'm getting my name down, and I, I started to sort of explore what was online within the kind of the progressive communities, and I stumbled across Progressive House UK, and I also, and Progress On, and a couple of these, and some of these other, UK progressive setups, like 21st Century Progressive, and Progress On were putting on a competition, and I thought, you know what, I'm going to give this a go. And by this point, I'd already been doing a few of my mixes, and I've been putting my mixes on Mixcloud, and I thought, I'm going to give this a go, and I won it. I won the competition, and that gave me a kind of a real boost, because I was like, you know what, you're all right. And then, pretty soon after that, you took me under your wing. I think, well, there was a PHUK competition, which I didn't quite win, but the person who did win it was a deserved winner. I was like, yeah, their mix is amazing. And I entered a couple of other competitions where I came second or third. And I was like, oh, and it just really boosted me. And I just thought, you know what, you're loving this music, you're loving this scene. Just keep doing it, and just keep being involved in it. And, and then sort of, lockdown happened, and lockdown, and, the COVID years sort of galvanized a lot of that, because all you could do was sit around and play music. And it was a big savior for me, being at home, being alone. What more can you do is listen to music and get involved in the community. So you were doing your weekly thing with Lost In, and I tune in every week, and I very quickly realized, when I first listened to you mixing, I very quickly realised, I'm like, Tom, you've got a lot to learn here, mate. Do you know what I mean? Yeah, there's like, this guy really knows what he's doing. Or I was just like, how's he doing that? Or like, those transitions are amazing, and just like wanting to learn from you. And I thought, well, what's the best way of doing that? It's just getting involved and you know, um and watch and you know, being there every week and watching you DJ and listen to the music and and yeah, and so and here we are, and here we are today. And now I'm DJing for Point Blank Radio, as it goes. Right, 20 years ago, I was tuning into them, um, and loving what was being played. And I just wrote to their management and sent them some of my mixes, and they were like, "Yeah, we'll have you in. Let's have him in." And I'm doing a bi-weekly show now.
But you said something really like fundamental back there when we were talking earlier about, oh, this is the bit where we say on video that you wonder what's going on. Basically, my dog, for everybody that can't see, he's just off camera, stuffing his head into my tracksuit bottoms and sniffing and just being generally quite crazy. He's now dismounting the couch, looking like he's going to do something absolutely
That's
wild.
funny. Yeah.
So if you're
Well,
going to,
my cat's just meowed, so there must be
yeah,
something going on in the ether.
they're like, they're calling a timeout, Tom. Do you think that's what they're
It
doing?
could be that. Yeah, give us attention.
Shall we
You've had
actually
enough.
do a timeout? We can do we can do whatever we want, you know. Let's basically what you did in the right order was decided you wanted to do something,
Mm,
have some balls, take it
mm,
a step further,
mm,
prove to yourself that you could do it by
mm,
entering competitions.
mm,
And what's quite weird when we talk about this
mm,
is that when you think this is only 4 years ago,
mm.
we were still all doing DJ competitions. Like it,
Yeah,
could you imagine saying to somebody now, "Oh, I entered into a DJ competition"? But the thing that you did is you sought out your environment.
yeah,
You went to find where the music you loved was being
yeah,
housed slash
yeah,
discussed,
yeah,
and that's taking the right steps, Tom.
yeah,
That's saying, right, I'm serious enough that I want to communicate with people,
yeah,
put my money where my mouth is,
yeah.
and start to mix music. Can you remember? It's a bit of a tall ask because even I would struggle. But can you remember which artists influenced you at the time when you started DJing? When you
Do you mean
started DJing in this
in
time
this
round?
particular, yeah, this particular time round? So you know, no two ways about it. You know, I would listen to Sasha's stuff and just be like, right, I want to be able to DJ like this. You know, um, at a very basic level, you know, some people might laugh at this, but you know, Miss Monique was, you know, just, you know, I'd be like, well, if she can do it, I can do this. Do you know what I mean? And she's no great DJ, but she's really commit to her, you know, to her art, and she was constantly just commit, just that singular purpose, you know, finding tunes, banging out tunes that I was just like, oh, these are great, you know, and at the same time, and Digweed, I mean, his bunker sessions that he did over lockdown were influential. You know, there was just so much good music, and what I was, and at the same time, I was listening to yourself. I mean, I don't, you know, I was and fine and thinking, you know, I wanted to be able to do what Danny does. You know, I thought you were as good as anyone, in my honest opinion, and I would absolutely get blown out of the water by your Lost in nights, and just realize that there is this very rich vein of music. You know, either it's, I don't know if it's still there, or how to describe, you know, its existence, whether it's just always been there and I've just been out of the loop for so long, or whether it is within the last, I don't know how many years, somehow flourished. I know there's been there's so much good music coming out of South America, for example. There's so much, but this music is so universal. I mean, there's artists, you know, from Israel to Belarus to India to, you know, to Russia, you know, this just but just so much good music. And I was like, I'd be hearing track after track and going, just wow, this is great stuff, and almost too much, you know, because there's thousands of tracks that are out there, and you have to sort of sift your way through the wheat and the chaff, and because there's so much that can sound so similar, and just think, oh no, that's so similar, or that's just a little bit too formulaic. And it's the tracks that, for one reason or another, I would usually pick music based on if it gave me goosebumps, and it would not regularly, but you know, you'd out of 10 tunes, you might just get one that would just you hear it, and very quickly actually you would be like, oh, you just get that feeling. You know, people say house is a feeling. It really is. Like there is something unique about this music, and if you're tuned to it attuned to it in a certain way, it can just immediately give you that goosebump feeling, and I would look for that. But yeah, I mean, just to go back to your question, yeah, certainly Sasha was always probably my fave, you know, and you know, his ability to you know, weave music together in a certain way that would, you know, create a certain vibe and a certain emotion and rock a place to its foundations is just unique. But you know, he's a very unique talent, and but you know, yeah. So
Well, let's indulge ourselves. Let's geek out a little bit, because I said to you prior to this conversation on the podcast,
yeah,
and in previous conversations, you know, I haven't really delved in with people to talk about mixing, to talk about the art of it, the thoughts that go behind it. Now,
yeah,
you've been very kind and given me a lot of praise there. So you know, thank you for that. I take what I do rather seriously, and I say that with a sort of wry smile, because it's not serious stuff, right? We're not brain surgeons, and certainly your life is not being judged on the quality of what you're doing, and the volume of people listening to you isn't such that you need to lose any sleep over any of it. But I have always had a deep love for the music, the art of it, but more than anything, mixing.
yeah,
Mixing to me was the difference between being on a dance floor and ruining my chi. Just if a DJ mixed a tune badly, he undid for me the previous 3 minutes of enjoying that track. I understood from a very early age, I don't know why, even when I listened to hardcore DJs who could mix, and then later people like Buckham, because Buckham was in the drum and bass world long before he kind of went into his own sort of stratosphere. The guy could mix perfectly without problem.
yeah,
And I understood from my kind of collection which DJs were different than others because of their ability to mix. Did they always play all the biggest tunes? No, they didn't.
yeah,
And I had a joke with Richard a couple of weeks ago, or it might have been last week. We were talking about something, and he said that he stars all his tunes. He gives them ratings in his record
right,
box, right?
yeah,
And he said something about 3-star tunes. And I said, as a bit of a joke, life is too short for 3-star tunes. Because in my head, there is no way I'm going to part with any money And there's no way I'm going to take a risk if that first few seconds of listening to a track doesn't do what either my kind of computer wants it to.
Yeah.
It is out on its ear.
Yeah.
Now, when I say let's geek out a bit, I want to try and delve, and if I can ask you questions, they might not be easy to answer. So I will help where I can in terms of how I think.
Yeah.
But when I think about, right, I'm going to make a mix, there's a few things that go on in my head. One is that I'm already formulating the depth of the sound that I want.
Yeah.
And when I mean that, I mean what the energy of that's going to be.
Yeah.
I like melodic music. Primarily, that's what, you know, most of progressive has that melodic core that keeps it together.
Yeah.
It can have different rhythms. It can have different beat structures, and it can be different speeds.
Yeah.
Within a range.
Yeah.
But its melody is the thing that's probably kept it going. Now, those melodies can be quite haunting. They can be quite euphoric. They can be dreamy. They can be, you know, kind of like the organic stuff, quite melodic and light.
Yeah.
But still quite storytelling in their way of use. So for me, there is also the beat structure. There's the structure of the beats, what you're going to do, and how you're going to move the mix along from the first track to what would be your end.
Yeah.
Now, all of this stuff is what goes on in my head before I've even started to get tunes. However, one of the things that I kind of realized quite quickly is that you need a starting place. You need to decide what your story's going to be.
Yeah.
And often than not, I like to make intros. I like to use sound clips that will help create a theme within the mix.
Sure.
For me, this wasn't just about differentiation between other DJs. It was about the very ethos of telling a story. I want to tell a story with my mix. And in that story, there's going to be emotion, there's going to be tension, there's going to be energy storing up, energy being released.
Yeah.
Now, is this the sort of crazy shit you think also?
To some extent, yeah, for sure. I mean, when I'm putting a mix together and I'm selecting tunes, I've already sort of said that one of the criteria is to what degree does this make me feel a certain way, and it's usually a goosebump feeling. But I also get there you know, because it would be very easy to, for example, go to Beatport, look at the top 100, you know, hype 100, buy the first 40, and just randomly buy the first 40, and then just make a, you know, an hour's mix out of 12 of them, you know, just whack them together. And, you know, I'm sure that a computer could do it. Do you know what I mean? But what I'll do is I'll go through tracks, and it can be a little bit painstaking and somewhat, there's a certain degree of anxiety in it, because there's so much music there's so much you have to just say no to. So you can end up listening to 10 tracks and not liking a single one of them. But at the same time, you can end up sometimes finding quite a few and then that you really like, and then but you get to a point where it's like, I have to stop now, because it's like I could continue on for another 2 hours looking for tracks, but I have to sort of say, just do what you can now with what with this particular bunch. And I won't always necessarily stop there. So once they're sort of like in the bag, I'll then go back to each one of them and re-listen to each one of them and going, do I really like this? How much do I like this? Can I, because there's money involved as well. It's like, can I afford to get rid of this one? So I sift at least twice, let's say, you know, the tracks that I've chosen. And then once I've got that together, once I've kind of got my tracks, then depending on what I want to do with the mix, and the sort of audience that I might be creating it for, will structure it in different ways. So for my radio show, my last 3 mixes have generally been sort of what you might describe as going from soft to hard. Basically
Linear.
yeah, linear in a kind of and with a kind of upward trajectory. So BPMs would start quite low, the mood would be mellow, light, melodic, even somewhat vocal, and just getting steadily faster, deeper, harder, till you're playing something 127 BPM. It's almost techno, and debatable whether maybe it probably is techno, it's whatever, because these labels are so somewhat abstract, but yeah, it's certainly the tracks I'm playing at the beginning aren't techno. Let's just put it like that. Do you know what I mean?
You're quite eclectic like me, right? That's one of the things I think we meet in the middle, is that we're not scared to play whatever the genre is called. It doesn't really matter. The tracks work, they'll work, won't they?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm always looking for a starter track. So I'm always thinking, will this work as a starter? And then I'm also thinking about an end track. We know what's going to work as a final track. And then on the way, it can, because sometimes you can start hard and you just continue hard, and it's quite straight. The waveform is just straight across, and within that there's lulls in the intensity, and then there's highs, and it's almost like a linear but straight but up and down waveform in the mix. And then other times it might start hard, get slowly a bit much more chilled in the middle, and then go back up, so that it's kind of like a sort of like that. And then sometimes it's just, I don't know, just a bit more eclectic, and it's because one of the things.
I think the time of the mix, the length of the mix.
Yeah.
When I say time, I mean time in length of the mix is a very big determining factor in what you can and can't do.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. I always played very, very long sets.
Yeah.
A resident.
Yeah.
And then would back to back, where you would go on for 3 and you'd come off for 3 with Dave Furno.
Yeah. Yeah.
We were residents together.
Yeah.
All these create time in your head of what you've got to do in the time you've got.
Yeah.
I think for me, that has always been something that I like playing longer sets, but I change. But I don't know if I've said this to you before. Certainly, Richard and I were talking about mixing. Whether people can tell I do it or not, I change almost the styles every 3 tracks.
Right. Yeah.
15 to 20 minutes seems to be a period you can move through and into other styles.
Yeah.
Depending on how you do it, you can do it quite seamlessly. But that is my theory, is that I start and have blocks of 3. So in an hour mix, let's say it's 12 tracks, you could have 4 sections.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
And that would work to get me from one place to the next.
Yeah.
But play enough music that I would want.
Yeah.
And when you start thinking like that, it also, to sort of reference back to what Richard was saying, not every track needs to be 5 stars going crackers. You then start to think, right, this track leads to that track.
Yeah.
Now, the bit that's always intrigued me, the bit that I love, is the making. It's what I call the third track. I think Sean Strudwick and I were talking about this on a message to each other. The third track is the time that the 2 tracks are together, that only a DJ can do, playing those 2 tracks that his head has put together, that creates the secret third track.
That's right. Yeah.
And that's what I found in terms of digital DJing, just completely freed me to do all sorts. I could keep a noise, a rhythm, a percussion, a noise.
It's usually a rhythm. It's usually because it's quite hard to get the melodies in tracks in sync. But I would, you know, this is where keys become important for me. Whereas for other DJs, they're not necessarily the case, because I can sometimes meld tracks together in a way that it sounds, the melodies seem to, and how I do it is, I don't entirely know how. It's a bit of a it's like it's just a
It's the
feeling that
same.
you get. It's just a feeling,
I know
you
what
know,
you
at the end
mean.
of the day. It's a
It's a
feeling.
bit. It's a
Yeah.
bit like in sport when when the ball comes across and you strike it, you know it's going in.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's barely hit your foot, but
Yeah.
the feeling of the ball on your foot, you know it's going in.
Yeah.
And I think it is slightly intrinsic and it is slightly kind of in there when you just know. But I think prior to that, I can hear when two tracks will go together.
Yeah.
I don't need to sit there and actually
Yeah.
look at them going together to
Yeah.
know they are.
Yeah.
You're right to mention keys.
Yeah.
I think there's a lot of DJs use key sync. I think it's just stupid
Mm-hmm.
because you just would mix your tracks in the right keys anyway. The
Mm-hmm.
machine is not really putting your tracks in key, it's bending them. So if you obey the harmonic wheel
Mm-hmm.
and you obey the laws of musicians, music, that 3 up, 3 down works, that is how I've mixed for the last 4 or 5 years.
Right. Yeah.
That's
Yeah. Yeah.
not a secret, but it's why I absolutely know 2 tracks are going to go. Is not
Yeah.
only is my brain said they'll go, they actually go,
Yeah.
and then you mix them so that they do.
Yeah.
You then use the mathematics of digital mixing to make sure that they absolutely go.
Yeah.
So that's what I was saying about being geeky about the mix, is that
Yeah.
you don't just go, I like these 2 tunes, I'm going to mix them. You did
Yeah.
in the actually you did in the old days. That's
Mm.
exactly what you did.
Mm.
When you got better, you realized they probably don't go together as well as those in that order.
Yeah.
And I used to get used to playing in vinyl in a certain order.
Yeah.
And then I would have a record. If that didn't work on the dance floor, I'd almost have what I called like an encased track where
Yeah.
you'd go, right, that one instead.
You play that in
But
case. Yeah.
but watching the
Yeah.
dance floor as a resident for years and looking at the energy is also what's, for me, gives me a confidence to play the way I want, because I can imagine that energy for the listener.
Yeah.
Lost In was an interesting project for that, because of course you're playing live.
Yeah.
You couldn't just play any old thing. Now, you didn't know what other people were doing,
Yeah.
but we did in a way because everybody was on the chat. So everybody was listening and everybody was on the chat, but they were responding in a way on the chat that you knew everybody was listening.
Yeah.
And one of the things that helped me during that period, not only from a mental health perspective, but I was able to play to a group of people who were willing to let me just play
Yeah.
anything. They didn't know.
Yeah.
It
Yeah.
wasn't like a request show.
Yeah.
And at the same time, I didn't want to disappoint by just playing whatever I'd got together that week. You know, I still wanted to put effort into it.
Yeah.
And we got to listen to an amazing amount of music. It was, I can't remember how many records I bought during like Lost in its entirety. When I was playing every week, I was playing upwards of 30 to 40 tunes
Oh, easily, because
every
I
week.
think you averaged around about 3 hours a
Yeah,
mix a week. I mean, it wasn't always. Sometimes it was just 2 hours, because that's all we
yeah.
all
Was
did.
towards the end I had to keep it.
Sometimes you did 4 hours, and you know, if 2 hours is about 24 tracks, you're talking, yeah,
Yeah,
36 to 40 tracks, you know, on a weekly basis, you know, yeah.
but it was
Yeah,
kind of
but the
the
thing is that one of the things that I want to stress is I still feel I'm learning. I still feel I'm learning. Like, so I'm, with every mix and with every mix that I listen to that's by someone else, I'm listening to see what is it they're doing and why have they done why have they done that, and oh yeah, that sounds good, why does that sound good, you know. And that's always been the case with the big name DJ. So Sasha, for example, you're just like, how does he manage to do that? How does he manage to capture your interest? And of course, it's he has the luxury of having access to music that is in certain ways already been sifted for him. It's already, you know, he's probably got he's probably got some poor guy sits in a room listening to hundreds of tracks going, yeah, and then just goes, yeah, these are the ones, and he goes, thank you. I don't know, that maybe that's
You
a
know, I think that's probably the
mischaracterization,
truth
but I'm sure he's, he's been told, yeah, no, this one, mate, yeah, check this out, and he gets access to music that is there for us, but we have to do a lot of sifting and we have to kind of, and so there's an element of that, but at the same time, it's a skill that's difficult to actually pin down and quantify. Yeah, it's just, and I'm so in that sense, I'm always kind of wanting to learn, and I would listen to your mixes as well, and just going, how has he kept this going? How has he done this for the last 3 hours? Do you know what I mean? And just sort of thinking, we're still all going, still really enjoying this.
Well,
And
it's
in
a
that
mixture.
sense, I like to, I want to feel I'm always learning in that sense.
Yeah, that's a nice way to approach it. I mean, certainly
Mm,
I don't feel any longer I've got anything probably to prove to myself.
mm,
I think when, like you said, when I moved from vinyl coming back to digital, there was definitely an element at which I've discussed it on other talks where you get your first set of decks and you're hopeless on them because they're hopeless decks.
yeah,
But you go through the pain barrier with them, then you get your techniques, and then a new sort of world of problems opens up. But you've
yeah,
invested the money, so
yeah,
you're emotionally invested and financially invested, and you carry on and blah blah blah. Then you might get a break, and you realise that when you've practiced like mad at home, you then go in and you think you're just going to do it exactly the same in this club, and then you realise the music's so much louder, you can't hear what you're
yeah,
doing.
yeah,
Well, you never ever come to a bit where you've sussed it because the environments are different, the crowds are different, the your feeling is different, your mood can be different.
yeah,
I didn't used to get very pissed when I DJ'd. I still don't. If I do have a few beers and that's how it goes, do I get better? I wouldn't say I get better. I
yeah,
probably care less if I make minor mistakes, but I don't get better.
yeah,
So the concentration levels that you sometimes need to mix for hours can be helped by your own passion within it. Like
yeah,
you can't play music to other people that they will like, hoping that their energy will always give you energy.
yeah,
And that for me is why these, sorry to say it, these twats that are on in the big Tomorrowlands and all the rest of it, you're never going to hear about them later on because they're just smashing out music, jumping off the stage, putting cake in their face, fireworks going off. It's just for me not what it's about at
yeah.
all.
That's
You
another
know,
level of
don't want to name
entertainment,
any
isn't
names,
it?
but
Yeah,
we all know them. And
yeah,
for me, this is it sounds poncy, but it's artistry. I'm doing this because I want people to enjoy it, but I'm really enjoying it. I kind of want to give all I can to my craft. But, and this is where my point is finally coming. One of the things that I was doing during Lost In was a massive amount of practice.
yeah,
Not
yeah,
before the show, because I program things.
yeah,
I program things so they're right.
yeah,
When you're doing hours and hours and hours and hours of mixing, like a golf swing or like penalty, like Beckham or Tiger Woods,
yeah,
I thought about the 10,000 hours of practice thing about
yeah,
being a master. So I saw lockdown as a huge opportunity to really put the work into
yeah,
the art and the craft,
yeah, yeah,
and obviously invested in better equipment, was therefore more um, emotionally and financially invested in doing
yeah,
it and getting it right. I invested in equipment that would translate to a club
yeah,
instead of me playing on laptops and
yeah,
you know um, bits of kit. I
yeah,
wanted to be able to plug a gig stick in. If somebody asks me
yeah,
and I've got all this music, I wanted to be able to go and play it straight
yeah,
away. So
yeah,
there was an element at which Lost In did multiple things for me. The
yeah,
fact you're live keeps you sharp. I
yeah.
can't stress that enough.
Sure,
Um,
sure.
Playing live, albeit a live stream, your brain, even the setup, you've got a million things going on. You're
Yeah,
communicating with people, you're
yeah,
choosing tracks, you're mixing them, you're
yeah,
making sure all the bloody wires are right, the laptop's on. You
yeah,
know, thinking back those first few weeks, it was like mayhem.
yeah,
But like you said, you've got to push yourself. Like
mm,
you've got to push yourself.
yeah,
Why was I doing it? I was compelled to do it. Really, lockdown was fucking miserable, man. It was miserable, and I knew
Yeah.
it was going to be.
Yeah.
A week into it, I thought I'm not going to cope with this. I was
Yeah.
actually working, but not working in the same way.
Yeah.
So for me, it was a lifeline. It was a fortunate technology time where we could, because I started on Facebook. But yeah, I decided to do different things each week. It's not something that I ever told the listener, but some weeks I would concentrate on transitions. Some weeks I would speed mixes up. I would have more elements in mixes.
Mm-hmm.
I would practice hand speed,
Mm-hmm.
practice using my left hand more.
Mm-hmm.
It's very easy for DJs who are naturally right-handed to cross the mixer with their right hand and touch different things with their right. I decided I wanted to be as ambidextrous as possible,
Interesting.
and I
Yeah.
really tried to push myself at being
Yeah.
as good as possible.
Yeah.
I went through a period of slightly not getting there with the effects,
Yeah.
then finding my way with what I could add to the track. Because let's not
Yeah.
forget, these people that make the tracks, they do an amazing job.
Yeah.
They don't need you putting an effect on the top of it.
No,
But if you get the effect right,
that's right.
and you get
That's
the
right.
energy right,
Yeah.
your effect can be your
Yeah.
extra energy to
Yeah.
build that story.
Yeah.
So there was a lot of practicing going on,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
albeit live. You
Yeah.
know, life's not a fucking practice, is it? It's happening all around us.
No, absolutely.
But
And ultimately, that's, ideally you want to be playing live. That's the whole reason you do it. I mean, it's because I think there's an element of being a DJ where you want to show off the music. You want people to appreciate, because there's an element of performance, and within that kind of, you know showing people, I've heard this, listen to this, you're going to like this. And people who appreciate music will go, yeah. And it's like, I heard this track, it's called Drone Me Up Flashy. I think it's called DJ Co's. And the first time I heard it, I just, because it changes suddenly and there's this transition, it's like you get about halfway through the track, and then this piano comes in and it just turns into something beautiful. And the first time I heard it, I was just like, oh, man, I want people to hear this. And it goes beyond just wanting, just enjoying it yourself. You just want to go, hey, listen to this, listen to this. This sounds like, listen to how good this is. And I think it was my second Point Blank show, and I played, that was the first track I played, and I knew. And when I was putting the mix together, it was just that part of me that had that reaction to the track. It was just like, this is your opportunity now to make people listen to it. And I put it on, and immediately, within about halfway through, someone put shout out on the message app saying, "Wow, this is a great track," and that was it. Job done.
yeah,
You at least one one person out there has just gone, oh, and had that experience, and that's what you want to, you
yeah, you're
just want to
finding
do,
something and sharing it, aren't you?
Yeah,
That's what
yeah,
you're doing.
yeah, yeah,
I was like some sort of pirate during Lost In. If you'd have looked in my crate at not only the range of BPM,
yeah,
but the artist names, titles, like I say, I was like a pirate. It was like, I'm having that, I'm having that, I'm
yeah,
having that. And I would
yeah,
bung it all in there, knowing I was playing live each week. I didn't
yeah,
even have to care that I'd not going to play the same track. I
yeah,
didn't even care. I was just going to get new music, new music, new music.
yeah,
And there's a sense that I want to give something, I want to give a very sweet mix of things to people from the music I want to share. I want to give them a sense of nostalgia. I want to give them a comfort
mm-hmm,
that they have heard or like that
mm-hmm,
sound.
mm-hmm,
And that is mixed with nostalgia.
mm-hmm,
I want to give them something they've never heard.
mm-hmm.
And I also want to give them a rhythm that makes them wanna be
Dance.
on a dance floor.
Yeah,
Now that's quite a heady mix when you
yeah,
know people are sat down.
yeah, 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 it's
But
true.
that's where a melodic thread
Yeah.
works, because you can have massive melody and you can have elements of melody.
Mm.
And that skill going between the genres is about never losing the thread of melody, but
Yeah.
going through different sounds
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
not exhausting people with one type of sound or one whole thing. And I guess
Yeah.
that's where the 3 records thing comes from,
Yeah.
where you can very obviously transition from one sound to another
Yeah.
when you know the listener's ready. You've built it in a way that they're ready to move through, and they trust you in that transition to say, right, something totally different's coming, but
Yeah.
I'm not, my energy level hasn't disappeared or dissipated.
Yeah.
And I think like that's what I have noticed the best DJs in the world do.
Mm-hmm.
They don't
Mm-hmm.
come on and play massive big tunes all in a row.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
They do tracks, or they play tracks, they do things and introduce you to things where you go, what was that massive piece of music in the middle?
Mm.
And that's what
Mm.
you're right. That's what it is. You're still playing people music.
Mm.
And I think some of the really good techno that I found during the Lost In period really was like showcase bits that I
Yeah.
was building tracks to those moments.
To those moments. Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
were they 3-star tracks? No, they weren't
Yeah.
3-star tracks.
Yeah.
But these were like 6-star tracks, and you've
Yeah.
got to get to
Yeah.
them to
And
showcase
this
them.
is often a dilemma to me, because this, yeah, it's your 6-star track. It's like, do I start with this? Because you can start with that track and people are like, they're sitting up, they're dancing, they're like, what? And then, or do you start with something that's a little bit more, so, and then you build, because it's like, how do you capture that? You want to capture that attention and you want to get that you want to have that impact, but it's like, do I start with this or do I lead up to this? And you're going to have a few tunes like that. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah,
But you're absolutely right. Either way, you're having an impact, and even if you start with a 6-star track, you want to be introducing something a little bit later on that is as good as, otherwise you completely lose all,
yeah,
you just like, you peaked too early, sort of thing. So it's, yeah, I know what you're saying. There's always that kind of, that structure of where you're taking someone on a journey, for want of a better cliche. It's
yeah.
journey. And
Well,
um
that's what it is, and nobody wants a journey, like turbulence in a plane. Nobody
no,
wants that.
no,
Do you fly vertically upwards and then go like that? No, you don't in a plane. You
yeah,
kind of go up, and you probably go up at different lengths, and
yeah,
it's all got to be smooth, otherwise people
yeah,
feel uncomfortable. And I think that also knowing the environments that perhaps people are in, or knowing the style of that club or the style of that promoter's choice of DJs helps you create a set that's right for certain places. I
yeah,
think I think if I'm honest, and without sort of shameless self-plugging, because I want to move on to your radio show, one of the big decisions about Early Doors Club for me and probably Richard was that I wanted to differentiate playing live exciting music compared to music that I'd often mix because I knew people were sat listening.
interesting, yeah, yeah,
Progressive works on so many levels,
yeah,
but a huge level is that it's very listenable.
yeah,
It's very, very melodic. You turn it up, it's got huge power.
yeah,
I listen to Hernan every week without fail,
hmm,
because I train. It's an hour long, I train to it or I run to it.
yeah,
I listen to all your mixes. I listen to
hmm,
all the resident mixes. I
hmm,
listen to all of the mixes that people give me. So I
hmm,
listen to an awful lot of music, as
yeah,
well as thinking about what I'm going to play.
yeah,
And I think with the Early Doors Club, we realised that we needed or wanted to reach a bit of a broader spectrum of people,
yeah,
but give them a clubbing experience that was still a mix of music. But what I realised is that in the club environment, particularly with what we were trying to do, We wanted to maintain that level of excitement.
Yeah.
And generally to do that, you need to mix quicker. You haven't got as long.
Yeah.
And I wanted to find a new sound. And I think I've found it. And it's quite hard.
Okay.
And it's quite it's exciting.
Mm-hmm.
It's familiar.
Yeah.
It's new.
Yeah.
But it's not so out of the realms that people are going to be like, when's this going to get going? Or like, where's the hook? Or
Yeah.
yeah, do you know what? I'm going to go off and chat. Because I think that's the energy of DJing in different environments is all about that. And Richard and I worked hard at finding a sound that was nostalgic but futuristic, but not only inclusive to people who are into the music deeply.
Yeah.
I wanted people who haven't been clubbing in 3 or 4 or 5 or even 10 years to come in
Yeah.
and dance and actually dance.
Actually dance.
To
Yeah.
dance to music. Therefore, your rhythms need to be thought about.
Yeah.
And melody isn't as needed as rhythms
Yeah.
and breaks and chops and
Yeah.
crescendos.
Yeah.
So that's been a really interesting thing because, again, like you said, I'm seeing that as an opportunity to push myself
Yeah.
and put my money where my mouth is. You know, nervous is the right word. I was nervous at our lost gig, but the last Early Doors Club was the most enjoyable set, the most enjoyable evening I've had behind the decks
Brilliant.
in 20 years.
Yeah. Nice.
Because everybody was dancing all night long. I was
Nice.
finding everything Richard was doing, like you said, he DJs differently than me. I'm like looking over his shoulder. I'm doing the lights. The only thing I
Yeah.
can see is knowing when the break of his tune's coming. So I'm doing the lights, looking over. I was just in awe of the stuff he
You were
was doing.
VJing, were you?
Yeah, it was 3 decks. He's doing 3 decks, and it was just
Yeah.
so exciting. And at certain points when he was playing certain tracks, it was just a perfect vibe of 90 people dancing for joy.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Free as well.
Yeah.
Anyway,
Yeah. Yeah.
that's enough about me.
Mm-hmm.
Tell us about what is strange, because I didn't know that, is your Point Blank radio show. Because you said in the beginning you used to listen to him. Now you play on there, right?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Tell us about it, Tom.
So, it's it's an interesting format because radio is, well, certainly Point Blank radio, because you've got some radio shows where I've played on sort of house music radio, online radio, where you don't have to say anything. You can just, all you do is you tune in, you play your set, and that's it. you know Whereas that's not the case with Point Blank. It's a proper radio station. It's like, like Radio One or Capital Radio. You can't DJ just can't sit there and not say anything. You've got to thank the previous DJ for what the handover, essentially. You introduce yourself and what you're about to do, because you realize that uh, you're always going to have a new set of listeners or people who've tuned in who don't know who you are, what you're doing, or someone who's never even tuned into Point Blank before, and you have to, almost every time, it's just new every time. So you're just introducing who you are, what you're doing, how long you're going to be there, and then you say, you interact with the audience. So yes, this week it was bank holiday, so it's like, what's everyone been up to, and you're speaking to an audience and you're looking for interaction, because the format is such that you have an app where people can send in messages, and the app allows you to just simply press a button which says that you're feeling it, or send a message, and then you've got an actual text you've got a studio number. And in that sense, it's like it used to be a pirate radio station. So just like old school pirate radio stations, the people like, send in your shout outs, the number is, and people would be sending in their shout outs, this is Steve in Wrexham, loving the tunes, this is banging, you say, like, nice shout out to Steve, and it's that same format, even though it's now a legitimate digital radio station, and people will send their shout outs in, and appreciate what you're playing. and you're having that interaction with your audience, and you'll have your regulars, and it's personal, and you're talking, and some people don't um always like that, because you are talking over the music, and but you're it's the format is such that you're introducing music, you're telling people what this is, so you can have DJs tuned in, like you would when you listen to a pirate radio station. You might hear something going, what is this? And you wait for the DJ to say something, and lo and behold, he does. He says, this is blah blah blah, tune's called, on this label, and you'll do the same, and what you're providing is to some people who certainly sometimes you've got DJs listen to the station, be like, oh, nice one, yeah, I'm going to buy that, or they can, because you can always listen back to the show if you don't get it straight away. But it's one of the things that's interesting is that you don't even necessarily have to do a set. So if you listen to some of the radio DJs on Point Blank, they'll just they won't necessarily mix a track in. They'll just they might play a jingle and then bring a piece of music in, completely different BPM, maybe completely different style, because and to some degree there's a certain freedom in that sense. You're not under pressure to make sure you're mixing right. But I will just because I'm playing prog, I will tend to put a set together and mix. But you're mixing live. You're not playing a pre-recorded show. And in that sense, it's quite you've got to keep your eye on the ball. There's always something going on. So you've got the messages, you're making sure you're mixing okay. You've got to make sure that you haven't got the mic on because you've got a talk over function on the mic, which means that when you are talking over a track, the music is lowered just slightly so that you can hear what the DJ says, and you've got to make sure you switch the mic off, because there've been instances where someone's left the mic on and they're giving out to the missus in the room, whatever, or the dog, and it's coming over the airways, and you've got hundreds of people listening. And you can tell from the app tells you how many people are listening online and how many people are listening via the app. But what you don't know is how many people are tuned in on digital radio. You have on average about 120 people with listening on the app or listening online, but there could be another 50 to 100, possibly more, listening via digital radio. And in that sense, it's a real step up for me, and I love it, and it's a different pressure, in the sense that you've got to make sure you're ready for that. It's only 2 hours, but
No,
it's
Tom,
very
listen,
it's very professional. It's very professional. It's very
I'm
professional.
immensely proud of you. I don't mean that in a condescending way. I just mean during the time I've known you, I Progressive House UK was about quality.
Mm-hmm.
I sort of talk about wanting to help promote underground DJs. I don't do that in some sort of charitable way, like we give everybody a crack. I'm quite, the door is quite firmly shut. You need to get to a certain level, and your talent, your abilities have gone on and on and on, and this driving yourself, this stuff that you talked about tonight, about studying, listening, working out, looking at different things, looking at different styles, watching DJs, listening to DJs, but also how you put yourself out there, going in for DJ mix competitions. You, similar to me, have tried many different things, from the pre-recorded kind of live internet radio shows to you did a live stream. We did a live stream once, didn't we, for I think it was the second birthday. We
Yes,
all got in a
birthday,
row,
yeah.
and we did it one
Yeah.
after another. We've pushed ourselves, and you've continued to push yourself right at the forefront of the kind of technology bit and the squeaky bumhole bit,
Mm-hmm.
where
Mm-hmm.
things can go really wrong
Mm-hmm.
and leave you feeling like an absolute idiot.
Mm.
You've kind of got to push through it. And
Yeah.
the radio show, you've done that. I think I listened to the first one. I listened to the second one. I haven't listened to the third one yet, but I can tell because I know you that even between the first one and the second one, there's more of an ease in your voice in the second one.
Yeah. I was really
Um,
nervous the first time, and in that sense, not quite myself, but
less
as
was
you get,
more, wasn't it? In that
that's right. Yeah.
episode.
Yeah. Because so many of these guys, it seems like you listen to them and they're just so relaxed. Do you know what I mean? Because they've been doing it longer and they're just used to it. Whereas it's quite new for me to be playing, on radio, whereas some of these guys have actually probably been doing pirate radio for absolutely years,
Yeah.
for decades. So it's just second nature to them. So they know exactly what to say and when to say it, and whereas I'm learning all that, and I think I'm doing all right,
No, you are, mate. No, it's
but
incredible.
sometimes you get tongue tied as well because um, yeah, the moment you press that button, the mic's on, and what you say is, 200 people are going to hear it, and and yeah, but I'm getting yeah, every each show I think I'll get slightly more relaxed with it, and hope.
I
Yeah.
think also the experience you're gaining is huge.
Mm-hmm.
You came up, you did a Progress On gig, you've DJ'd a few gigs. Each gig's different, right? It has
Yeah.
its own problems, it has
Yeah.
its own environmental factors, like can you hear a monitor? Have you got a monitor?
Yeah.
Can you is the sound filling the room? Are you playing enough tunes to make people in this space dance? Are they here to dance? A lot of the time, actually, a lot of DJing, believe it or not, people aren't necessarily there to dance.
Yeah.
They certainly don't dance like they did back in the days with gay abandon and just like raving. I
Yeah.
mean, that's very rare. Um, you know, People tend to be a lot more sedate. They tend to film things. Clubbers
Yeah.
don't quite act like they used to. So I think there's
Yeah.
a
We've
lot of,
become, we've become more self-conscious.
yeah, we have, because we
Yeah.
know that we're being recorded, and
Yeah.
we're recording ourselves, we're recording everything.
Yeah.
Everybody's recording,
Yeah.
all the time, and I think that's
Yeah.
taken away from the element.
Yeah.
But the radio show is a bit blind. I wouldn't say it's exactly the same because it isn't by way of medium, but live streaming was like that.
Yeah.
You couldn't scratch your ass.
No.
You could do what the fuck you want, of course, but I certainly didn't. I knew that the camera angle that
Yeah.
people were looking at couldn't be completely boring, but couldn't also be so busy that
Yeah.
it was offensive.
Yeah.
I thought about lighting. I
Yeah.
thought about the angle at which I was stood at which people didn't feel like my face is right in the screen. If I step back, am I out of camera shot? Can
Yeah.
I eat something at the side of it? Can I
Sure.
drink something? Can I be professional and give people not only a sort of professional courtesy, but also a kind of consistency that when they
Yeah.
turn on,
Yeah.
I'm getting what I expected. The
Yeah.
music was the thing that changed, but I didn't want people to feel uncomfortable. And I guess that's the skill, like you're saying, of a good radio show. Is a radio show can be like listening to your mate, putting on your
Mm-hmm.
slippers
Yeah.
and getting comfy.
Mm.
You'll get there, Tom, because you've got the knowledge and you've got the guts to do it. I just think
Mm.
it's the 10,000 hours of practice, right? You'll
Yeah.
just get to a level, and you don't know what this could bring you. You don't know what this could do.
No. No.
Could bring
But currently,
opportunities
currently,
that
I'm just happy to be doing it in and of itself. I mean, when you know, because I've been listening, when I found out they went, they went legit, and they had a digital show going on, and their web page and everything. I saw they had like, contact the studio, and they had like a little email thing, and I just tentatively said, just sent them an email saying, "Well, are you looking for DJs?" And I play this sort of type of music, and here are my mixes. Check this out. I wasn't entirely, sure they were going to get it back, but they did. And they emailed me back. And they were like, "We really like what you're doing. You've got some great mixes. But first of all, you're going to need this equipment." And there was this kind of like there's a sort of standard in terms of what is expected in terms of preamp and your mic and your sound card and stuff. And at the time, I couldn't quite afford it, but when I could, I let them know, and they, excuse me, they got back to me straight away saying, "Great, let's we'll do a little test thing." And then you were straight in, and it was like, "When do you want to?" And it was like, "I want to do this," and because you can DJ every week, or you can do it every other week. And I was, I've gone for every other week because it's expensive. It's a finance thing. If I had the money to be able to buy, all the new, because I I feel I have a responsibility to play new music. I mean, I could easily go back to my old mixes and play some old mixes, and I probably will at times, just to break up some of the intensity of having to find new music every 2 hours worth of new music. And also, and financially, it's just a little bit, takes some of the pressure off. But I do feel like when I'm like this week, it was like, this is most of the stuff I played, all of it 100% within the last year, and 80% has been released within the last 3 months. So, you know, um, and yeah, and I sort of feel a responsibility to these artists as well who are making this music to get that out there. And what I'll do is I contact them. Well, not in every case, but in a few cases, I've actually just, where, for example, the artist has put in their Facebook page the advert for their track, their most recent track. I'll just put a little comment. I'm playing this tomorrow on my show, 2 to 4, and I've had 3 artists get back to me. Thank you, really appreciative. And one asked me for the actual recording and say, "Listen, when you've done, send me, direct message me the actual recording." And when I did, he was really appreciative, because they need to get this music out. That's the only way that this music gets out there is when DJs play it on radio shows, and people hear it and then they buy it.
It's a really important point, that, Tom.
Yeah.
That I think people forget. I've always tried to, what we call on social media, obviously, tag people on.
Yeah.
There's ways of tagging people like, "I want you to listen to this." There's ways of tagging people that's like fanboy.
Yeah.
When I'm in the right sort of frame of loop with it, I will put a mix on for the Progressive House stuff or my own stuff.
Yeah.
And probably tag people. And the mix that I did for the Progressive House UK birthday, I put some effort into it. I'm not going to pretend I didn't, and I thought about it a bit longer maybe because it was the birthday mix. But I didn't particularly deviate massively from the types of artists that I've always used. I didn't go for just all the popular ones, like you said. I've got my dog now coming at me from all angles. He's decided he's going to go in a completely different door. he can't seem to go in and out the same way. Come on, mate. Doing a podcast here. Get back up here. Come on. That's it. He runs the house, this dog.
Oh, they do. They do.
And yeah, I tagged Nichols on because I'd used 2 of his tracks in the mix.
Yeah.
Now, I've used Nichols for years. You might remember some of his tracks from the Lost In days. They they are roof raisers.
Yeah.
He makes very exciting, different, progressive techno. Wow, just amazing.
Yeah.
And I tagged him on like would everybody else. And similar to you, he reached out and he was like, "I absolutely loved what you did with my track." And I think it had layered the David Attenborough over the top of his track at the end. And it means a lot because certainly that's easier for me to do than create the tune he made. And then we forget that these people aren't all superstars. They're guys like me and you who are doing this more for a passion than they are for trying to make lots of money. Various people get more success than others, if they get picked up by the big labels. But let's be honest, we're not messing about. We're buying their tunes.
Yeah.
We're mixing them with passion and pride.
Yeah.
And that is probably, let's be honest, a huge market of the people buying these producers' records are guys like me and you.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, Nick Warren might play one or two and never ever play them ever again.
Yeah.
But actually, the fact Nick Warren might have played them might spurn 500 people to buy it. But it might be
Yeah.
people like me and you that really,
Yeah.
really search, cotton onto these DJs early in their career and go, this guy's good, and I'm going to play it and sort of stick to it.
Yeah.
So I think you will find that your radio station will give you an immense amount of pleasure, and also that's a good angle to sort of bank, connect with, and be at one with the people who are really making the effort to make this music. I've always said I'm a DJ. I
Yeah.
mix other people's records.
Yeah.
No, there is nothing mind-bending about that. The
Yeah.
way I do it might be quite unique, but it's their records, it's their music. I'm just
Yeah.
making a story out of it.
That's right. That's right.
And I never forget that. It's not
No.
like, you know, I don't go around pretending to be anything other than that. So
Yeah.
what do you think? What do you think, in sort of conclusion, the future looks like for you, Tom?
Well, that's a good question. I mean, I'm in a good place with the radio show, and that's going to be something of a challenge over as I get used to, you know, producing a show every 2 weeks. You know, I'm point blank. And I would hope to play out more. I'd love to play out live, and to get an opportunity to play out live more, certainly. And beyond that, I haven't really thought, but that's certainly, you know, one of my driving intentions is that I get the chance to play out, you know, and to play to a live audience, and to see my mixes and the music that I play affecting people in a real club environment, you know. And it's yeah, that's
It's a bit like it's a bit. I've used this and maybe this analogy before, but it's a bit like being a runner and never entering a race.
yeah.
You know, do you run? Yeah, I love running.
Yeah.
That's fine. You keep
Yeah.
fit. But if you say you're a runner, that
Yeah.
implies that you actually do events.
That's right.
And I think that is where that's where you cut the imposter syndrome and you move into, I can actually do this.
Yeah.
I'll be honest with you. I think that's what I needed with Early Doors Club. I was getting a lot of offers to come and do gigs all over the UK from people, and I was pleased about that because obviously I was doing something right and people were liking my music. But I was also struggling with the fact that how do I sort of tailor my sound to their event? What time am I playing? What's going on?
Yeah.
The Early Doors Club thing being at home and being different, it means I've got to put effort in.
Yeah.
It means I've got to put the effort in.
Yeah.
What I'm doing is removing some barriers of travel, of probably more difficult sort of structure around what I play, because I play quite eclectic.
Yeah.
I've changed the style. I know where I'm playing. I feel extremely confident with Rich as a partner, and we're obviously promoting. We're in the space that we're promoting, selling tickets. It's new, it's edgy, and I guess what I'm trying to say here is that both of us, Tom, in the years that we've known each other, are trying.
Yeah.
We're trying, and by doing that, you have to take risks.
Mm.
You have to put yourself out there, and you have to get uncomfortable at times. But how else do you move forward?
Yeah, it's true. It's true.
Maybe we finally need some sort of Progressive House UK night where we all get the residents together. It has been on my mind for a while. I think if Richard and I can get a community together, which is what we're trying to do,
Mm-hmm.
It makes it a lot easier to try and do that rather than hang our hat on the Progressive House UK thing as a brand.
Yeah.
It's easy sometimes to have a crowd and then put on a night and people be used to who you are and then invite other people along. You know, well, I don't want to put any pressure on you right now, but please do consider sharing your radio shows on Progressive House.
Okay.
You know, the
Yeah.
the show that the show that Nick Roger does, The Void,
Mm-hmm.
is probably the big brother to his earlier show, which was the Electronic Cat. And the
Yeah.
Electronic Cat, for all intents and purposes, was an amazing series that was
Mm-hmm.
really a radio show. Nick
Yeah.
used to, like you, narrate over the top. You know, yes, it was pre-recorded, but certainly the way he put it together was much more interesting.
Yeah.
And his show, The Void, now is probably the show I listen to the most.
Yeah.
I use it for listening to work.
I've got a real admiration for Nick in as much as he seems to have and be tuned into such a variety of music that you just wonder how, when did he get time to breathe? Like this guy must be listening to thousands of pieces of music, a week, and yet he has that kind of confidence to put something together that can be so eclectic and so different.
And unique.
He doesn't care. He's
No.
just like, I'm going to put this out there, and it's like, this is great, Whereas
Do you know
sometimes,
one of the things I always say that's interesting about a DJ mix? Try this theory, right? Because
yeah,
I'm right, because I think I'm right.
yeah,
If you get given a mix by somebody and
hmm
you skip through it,
hmm
there are occasions when it does not make any sense. You
yeah,
go, look,
yeah, it's true.
yeah.
Yeah, where's the
Then when you
uncommon
listen to
thread?
it,
Yeah,
when you listen to it in a go, you're
yeah,
like, wow. And
yeah,
Nicks are
yeah,
always like that. If
yeah,
you pick the needle up, move it along, so to
yeah,
speak,
yeah,
you won't have a clue what's going on. Your brain. I listened to his birthday mix today.
yeah,
There's some amazing tracks, and
hmm
like you said, he's not just off the beaten track. He's on the moon, walking around, looking over the cliffs of God knows what, finding
yeah,
this music.
yeah,
And this has been, something I want to highlight with you, because I can, without stealing your thunder on this podcast,
hmm
is Progressive House UK is progressive.
yeah,
We don't play one thing.
no,
It's a progressive style.
yeah,
And shows like Nick's, hopefully shows like your radio show, they add a huge wealth to what I want to do with Progressive House UK as a podcast in general.
hmm
But I'm with my peer group here. You
hmm
guys don't understand how nice this is for me to be in collaboration with a group of people who give me music that I can listen to
yeah,
and enjoy.
yeah,
You're my DJs. I
yeah,
don't. I listen to Hernan. I don't listen to Sasha. I don't listen to Digweed. I don't listen to Seaman. I don't listen to any of those big DJs except Hernan and Guy J. They're the only two.
interesting. Yeah, yeah,
Everybody else is my peer group
yeah,
because you guys are doing the searching
hmm
and you're bringing it back to me. You're
hmm
sharing music. We're just a music club.
yeah,
But
yeah,
I looked today at the stats, and 6,500 people downloaded our combined music
yeah. It's
from our
incredible when
podcast.
you think about that.
It's amazing.
Incredible. Yeah,
And
it
these are
really is.
people in America. These are people in
Yeah,
Russia.
yeah,
Believe it or not, these are people in the UK. UK, I
yeah,
think, is 25%. I think America's about 24. Then it's
yeah.
Russia, and then it breaks down the stats. So
Right.
we're not just playing to each other. We're
No.
playing to global people who we can't see,
Yeah.
and the numbers are growing. And I think that the toughest battle, Tom, as you well know, is bridging this gap between reaching more people and how important that is compared to the love of doing it. And I think,
Yeah. Yeah.
to round this podcast off, there's a huge amount of passion in what you're doing. And you said there, you're enjoying doing it. You've got to enjoy doing it.
Yeah.
If you don't, it, Lord knows where you're at. And sometimes I know I confide in you. Sometimes I get a little bit like, what am I doing?
Yeah.
I'm too busy, really. I'm in too many different
hmm
directions. But
hmm
this podcast talking to yourself like this about the thing we love has given me my joy back about what Progressive House was originally set up for. Because I think underground DJs are just as talented, just as dedicated, and often more, because they're also doing a big time job, families, you know, and they're doing this as a passion. So I just, I love where we're all at with it. And I'm just to reiterate how like proud I am as a friend of how you're doing. You just,
thank you, mate. And you've been a big part of it. You know, you've been a big part of it, and just believing in me. I mean, that's one of my thorn in my side is self-belief. So it's been a constant surprise, which is nice in certain ways. You know, it's like, oh right, oh you like that mix, okay, brilliant, and that, and it's interesting to be, and it's so lovely to be doing something that can elicit so much emotion and in a positive way, you know, in a way that's that joy and at times awe. It still amazes me how so many, that you can hear a piece of music and it will elicit a certain awe, and you think, and then you'll hear another piece of music and it could be like a week later and it's the same feeling, and it's like, how does music constantly do that? It's like, where is it all coming from? You know, and some people believe that, you know, there's a kind of musical realm, you know, that you sort of tune into, or well, I'm not sure if I believe that, but it certainly blows my mind how, you know, and I feel I've been quite lucky in just sort of finding music again in a way that sort of makes me feel those sort of things. And you know, because there's not a huge gap between awe and joy, and yeah, it just there's little else for me personally that elicits those feelings, that sort of, and so I feel lucky, really. And you know, and you've been a big part of that, and the whole progressive house community has been a big part of that, and you know, thank prog.
Amen.
Amen. Thank you. The cause of house.
Down to religion again.
I know.
Yeah, Faithless was right. God is a DJ.
Yeah, indeed. Yeah.
Listen, thanks
Music
again,
of
Tom.
the spheres, you know.
Thanks so much for being firstly a friend and such a good sort of colleague in this little mission of what we're doing. So yeah, we'll catch up with you again. We'll have another podcast. We'll get you going on your radio show, and we'll see in a 6 months or so. We'll reconvene and we'll catch up again. Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Thanks again, Tom.
Thank you.
All right, mate.